6. Or maybe electronic Bibles would be a help. Joshua chapter 3 is where I'd like someone to turn to first. We've got 3 verses from Joshua 3. How about this? Let's go ahead and take some volunteers to get a few passages lined up. All right, you want to do that one, Bree? So Joshua 3, verses 15 through 17. All right. Next one I've got is 2 Kings 2. All right, Elena, 2 Kings 2, and let's see, we're going to start in verse 4, and I'll tell you how far to go in a minute, all right? So Elena, you're 2 Kings 2. We're going to start in verse 4. And then I need 2 Kings 5. Caleb, all right. 2 Kings 5, and we'll get there, and I'll tell you exactly how much to read there as well, okay? So if you can get there, and then we'll start reading a little bit. So, a couple sites. One that you're expecting, right? And that is Jericho, right? So, we're going to get to Jericho, okay? But in order to get to Jericho, we have to cross a river. Does anyone remember what river? We have to cross the Jordan River in order to get to Jericho. This site is, Jericho's here in the central part of Israel, but you notice what actually it's in. It's not technically in Israel. You see where it is?
West Bank.
It's in West Bank, right? And West Bank is a very different world than we're used to. Qasr al-Yahud is where we're going to go on our way to Jericho, but you guys have been excited to learn about Qasr al-Yahud, right? I mean, that was right up there on top of the list of locations you wanted to see. We're going to get there, but one of the questions that I have asked is, how do they know this is the spot, right? Sometimes, like, come on, are you actually sure? So here's, I'm not expecting you to read anything up here, okay? But up here top left, if you can see that little blue, there's a little camera, a little blue tag, that's Jericho, okay? In fact, that is the old Jericho, and you kind of see this kind of mass of something there. That's modern Jericho. So there's a city all around it, okay? That's what that is. Any guesses as to what this kind of snaky thing is over here? The Jordan River, okay. And if you can see it clearly enough, I had to get back far enough so you could see the scope, but try to get it close enough. Can you see how barren it is on either side of the Jordan? And it's actually kind of mountainous a little bit too. It's really rough terrain, and you can kind of see it almost widening along with that. You see it? So part of how people know where locations are, because we're going to look at a spot in a river, and it should probably make us say, how in the world do you know this is the spot? Because there's no remains, there's no ruins. Well, there's some of it is proximity to where they're going, right? So Jordan River goes north to south. Well, you have to cross at a certain point, and so it's going to have to be close to Jericho if they're going to Jericho. There's going to be historical trade routes or roads. There's also going to be natural topography where if there's a cliff here, you're probably not going to plan on crossing the Jordan right there. You're going to go down to where it's crossable, right? So there's some of these things work together. Plus, you've got tradition and history, and they were very good about keeping historical record of things. So there's a number of reasons, but here is Qasr al-Yahud, right here. So you see this little cross right here, maybe. That's a monastery. You see then two symbols on either side of the Jordan. And that is where we're looking at, okay? So let's go ahead and start reading. Let's see. Yeah, okay. So let's start reading Joshua 3, verses 15 to 17. Bree.
And as they that bear the ark were come unto Jordan, and the feet of the priests that bear the ark were dipped in the brim of the water. For Jordan overfloweth all his banks all the time of harvest, that the waters which came down from above stood and rose up upon it, and heat very far from the city Adam that is beside Jericho, and those that came down toward the sea of the plain, even the salt sea, failed and were cut off, and the people passed over right against Jericho. And the priests that bear the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood firm on the dry ground in the midst of Jordan, and all the Israelites passed over on dry ground, until all the people were passed clean over Jordan.
Thank you, Bree. All right, so this is actually the spot when Moses has died now, right? Joshua's leading the people, and they're finally at the brink of literally the Jordan River, but to cross the Jordan is really, okay, we're doing it. We're going to go into Canaan, and this is actually the spot where they cross this wilderness here. It is very barren, very dry, very hot, and they came across the Jordan River. But it wouldn't have looked like this because this is very low at this time. If you remember me mentioning before, when we were talking about the Dead Sea, where it's not actually flowing into, it's not high enough, and it's not flowing enough to flow into the Dead Sea right now. So this is low tide, but did you remember what Bree mentioned? What was the river going to have been, what would have been like when the Israelites came across it? It's overflowing, right? So I don't know how wide it would have been, but this is the historical site. It's somewhat tradition. They're pretty certain this is probably, this is probably the location. Tradition says this is the location that the Israelites actually walked across the Jordan River. So they came to this, the priests touched their foot in this beautiful, clean, clear blue river, and the water stood up so they could walk across the Jordan River. 2 Kings chapter 2. Elena, is that you? Right, 2 Kings 2? Right? We've got another thing that happened here. And can you start reading in verse 4?
And God said unto him, Elisha, tarry here, I pray thee. The Lord hath sent me to Jericho. And he said, as the Lord liveth, and as thy soul liveth, I will not leave thee till they came to Jericho.
All right. I'm going to have you read a couple verses later, okay? Let's see. I want you to read verse 11 here in just a minute, okay? So not quite yet. Did you hear where Elijah said, Elisha, don't come with me. God sent me to, did you hear where? Jericho. Okay? So, we know where they were. We know where they're going. And tradition and history tells us that he's going to go to the river at a certain spot. Anyone want to guess? All right, here in verse, if you keep reading, I'm not going to read this whole passage because it's a little longer. But Elisha went with Elijah, and then the sons of the prophets, like the students, they told Elisha, "Hey, do you know that Elijah's not going to be here anymore?" And Elisha says, "Yes, thank you. I don't need you to talk about it right now. I know already." And then Elijah says, "Elisha, stay here. God's sending me to Jordan." And so he says, "I'm going with you. You can't stop me." And Elisha goes with Elijah to the Jordan River. And they crossed when Elijah took his mantle. And once again, remember what happened at the Jordan? Water split again at the Jordan. Quite possibly the same spot where Joshua and the Israelites crossed here. And then what happened in verse 11? Could you read verse 11? That'll be the last verse.
And it came to pass, as they still went on and talked, that behold, there appeared a pillar of fire and pieces of fire, and parted them both asunder. And Elijah went up by a grove of heaven.
Isn't that cool? Where did this happen? It happened right here at the Jordan River. So Joshua crossed with all the people of Israel at this spot in the Jordan River. This spot over here is the Jordan side of the Jordan River, Jordanian, the country Jordan. And so they have their own people come from that side to come visit this site. And this is the West Bank side. But God took Elijah up to heaven with him at this spot here in that whirlwind. Last one, 2 Kings chapter 5, right? And Caleb, you're going to be reading that, right?
Yeah.
So why don't you read verse 1 to set the stage, okay? Start with that.
Now Naaman, captain of the host of the king of Syria, was a great man with his master, and honorable, because by him the Lord had given deliverance unto Syria. He was also a mighty man in valor, but he was a leper.
All right. Now, does this jog your memory to Sunday school stories of Naaman, this very powerful man, had it all, except for what? He was a leper. And so he hears about this prophet in Israel because his servant girl tells him, if you remember. So then, can you read read verse 10, Caleb.
And Elisha sent a messenger unto him, saying, Go and wash in Jordan 7 times, and thy flesh shall come again to thee, and thou shalt be clean.
So this is the river that Elisha says, Naaman, here's how you're going to be clean. Go clean yourself in the Jordan River, right here. Now, how clean do you think you'd be if you washed yourself in that Jordan River right there? I can tell you what, you can smell the mud from a quarter-mile away. When you park the bus, well, I didn't park the bus. When the bus gets parked and you walk out, and first of all, you realize, oh, this is awful. It was 101 degrees on this day. The same day we went to Jerusalem, just a couple hours later, it was 85. All right, so it was oppressive. It was hot, and you know the smell of mud, almost kind of irony, kind of, you smelled it. It was not pleasant. And Elisha says, go clean yourself in the Jordan River. And Naaman in verse 11 says, are you kidding me? It says he gets angry, and he thinks, verse 12, he's got a couple rivers of Damascus, which we're going to see Damascus, or not, we're not going to see Damascus. Later on, we'll see Syria. We can look in from the northern part of Israel, you can look into Syria, and 40 miles from where I was, the northern part of Israel is Damascus. So he's thinking back, not that far away, there's a couple rivers, not that far away. Elisha, just give me a day, I'll be there, and I'll go wash myself in some actual clean rivers. And his servants came to him and said, you can't take this chance. Remember the story? If he would have asked you to do something impossible, you would have done it. Just do it. But it was very humbling for him, and he finally did. And he went. Let's see if I can see what verse, Caleb, you can read. Let's see, 14. Can you read verse 14?
Then went he down and dipped himself 7 times in Jordan, according to the saying of the man of God, and his flesh came again like unto the flesh of a little child, and he was clean.
All right. Did the Jordan River do that? No, God did, right? He had to believe the impossible and believe something that physically did not seem possible. It doesn't make sense, but he believed what God's prophet told him, and he was clean. All 3 of those stories happen at this spot, or at least in the very close vicinity to this spot of the Jordan River. All right, we crossed the River Jordan, and now we're going to go to Jericho. I told you it's in the West Bank, right? So this, I had to borrow, you can see the site mentioned. I had to find a couple of these pictures online because one of the things that our guide told us as we're going through these checkpoints is do not take pictures. The guards do not like people taking pictures at these checkpoints. And you are hoping the windows are tinted enough that they can't see, but the way they're looking into that bus, you think they can see everything. And so I didn't take pictures. In Bethlehem, we're going to see it a little bit, or I was able to, but this is the normal life for a lot of Palestinians and Israelis here. They had to go through these checkpoints. I didn't see one exactly like this, but I did see a number more like this. I was looking online for an example of a checkpoint, and there are apparently 176 checkpoints in the West Bank area. Very different from what I expected. Here's an example. Here's a description of one. Do you remember Bet Shean? Remember the hill, and underneath it is that whole big Roman city, had the bathhouse, and then the city of Bet Shean, or Beth Shean, was where Saul and Jonathan's bodies were hung, and we saw some of the remains up there. So the checkpoint by Bet Shean, here's how this site describes it: a crossing point in the separation barrier, staffed around the clock by military and private security companies, closed to Palestinians, with the exception of East Jerusalem residents who may pass following a thorough inspection. During certain agricultural seasons, Palestinian trucks transporting agricultural produce are allowed to cross twice a week. Like that's their life, that's normal life for them. Again, we're very blessed, but this is West Bank. It goes back to, especially to 1993 with the Oslo Peace Accords. If you remember back during the Clinton era, and the Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin and the PLO head Yasser Arafat, and they came up with this agreement. It largely began there. Through the years, they would kind of add more and take away. They would change the cities, but Israel gave back a large portion of their land. Basically, they did pre-1967 lines. The first 2 cities actually given back were Gaza and Jericho. This is Jericho. I have a short video, just give you a little bit of an idea of what it's like driving around the Jericho from our bus here.
No, it doesn't affect me because
That's
exactly sightseeing is
our
really
guide.
good here, and this is the good thing coming with our office because we enter into every single place, and not like if you have a Jewish token, you will not enter, and he'll try to cancel this place. So I'll tell you, I did reported on him last week. The Jewish lady said I will not enter, and he canceled Jericho, and he canceled Bethlehem, and he canceled all these places. And he had like Jericho, he said I can't enter, but the good thing about us having, Christian tour guide with you, we will enter to every single place.
You're red, right here on the
Because we
spot.
love you. Because you are the best group
See it?
ever.
So he is easier to understand when you're there with him. I know it's hard on the video, but he was saying this is a good thing about going with our tour group, because we go into everywhere. If you go with a Jewish tour group, they won't go into these places. They won't go into West Bank. He said there was just last week, there was an Israeli tour company that he just canceled these sites. He wouldn't go to Bethlehem, he wouldn't go to Jerusalem because of the politics. You know, and it's, some can't go there. Basically they allow tour buses, at least at this time. Did you see the guy making bread here in the shop just above this? And making pita bread. The region of West Bank is divided into 4 regions. You have, get this, A, B, C, and E1. Guys, we skipped one here. A, B, C, and E1. A is Palestinian. Okay, so it's Palestinian controlled and policed. B is shared, but for both. Okay, so B, they share control and it's Israeli policed. C is Israeli controlled. Okay, and then E1 are roads connecting those 3 regions. So even within West Bank, you have 3 different kinds of regions and then roads connecting them, and it's just a mess. But that's just, they're used to living that way now. Palestinian population is about 5.3 million. And this is a restaurant in Jericho, which, so again, in West Bank. And remember the Oslo peace accords with Clinton and I can't remember the Israeli prime minister, and then Yasser Arafat. And I think I mentioned this when I first got back, but this picture is the restaurant owner shaking hands with Yasser Arafat. That's on the wall. So this was our lunch. We actually went to this restaurant, I think 3 times. Folks really liked this place. We also knew the owners, which it seemed like Fote knew everyone over there. But you had pita bread and hummus, more hummus that I ate, believe it or not. That was what they called Turkish, I can't remember now. It was a little bit spicy. Always salads and Coke Zero. Also espresso, that's what that cup is. French fries that were not like McDonald's. But then they had kebabs. That's a chicken kebab and then a beef and lamb mix. And that beef and lamb kebab was about the best meat I had over there the whole time. It was excellent. But remember this picture? Remember just chicken and rice and cauliflower? Did anyone come up with a good name? Carson? Chickaflower, I like it. Can anyone beat Chickaflower? So you see the pan it came in, the bowl it came in, right? You see how they dumped it onto the plate? So they cook it right side up, then they came out, and it seemed like they were expecting us to be just in awe of this, because they were waiting for us to take pictures and everything. And he came and he smacks it down on the plate, and he turns it upside down. You know what they call this dish? Upside down. That's literally what they call this dish. And they were expecting us to, I think, be just amazed. And it was chicken and rice and cauliflower. And it was good, it was fine. But that was another one of our meals here. But this is kind of the way the outskirts will look. Pretty dry, like a lot of the region is. There was more trash maybe here than most. West Bank, from what I saw, maybe this isn't accurate, from what I saw, West Bank, the whole area was not as nice as Israel. It was just more run down, just how it was. Can someone turn to Luke 19? Who's going to turn to Luke 19 for us? All right, not everyone at once. Carson? All right. So did anyone figure out what this tree, not Michael, anyone figure out the tree? What's that? I think I heard. Did you hear? You overheard? No, take credit for it, Georgia Lee. Yes. Yes. So some of you guessed Zacchaeus. It would have given it away if I told you this was a sycamore tree, right? All right. So who's got Carson? You have Luke 19, 1 through 4. Almost there? Getting there? So this is where we're just driving by Jericho. We didn't actually stop. But you can see it's a thing, right? I mean, they got it gated, fenced off and things. Okay. Are we there?
I kind of think it's going to be a little bit hard for her to see when we get it up on.
Would you mind just doing it then, or? Great, thanks.
And Jesus entered and passed through Jericho, and behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus, which was the chief among the publicans. And he was rich. And he sought to see Jesus, who he was, and could not for the press, because he was little of stature. And he ran before and climbed into a sycamore tree to see him, for he passed to that way. For he was to pass that way.
Okay, thank you. So, if I would have told you it was a sycamore tree, you would have all known right away. This is not the sycamore tree. It is a sycamore tree. It happens to be very old, about 800 or 900 years old. But they will use it to get people to come and stop. But this tree is not old enough to be the tree that Zacchaeus climbed. It is probably a lot like the tree that Zacchaeus climbed, but they have this as a specific spot, and we just kept on driving, and I was all right with that. However, later on, if you stick with us, you will see a tree that is old enough and was in one of the locations that Jesus actually was. But still, it's kind of neat to see it and start thinking through, let your mind kind of play through. I've heard the story of Zacchaeus how many times, and we've sung the song, but now to think, oh, that was Jericho. I don't know that I would have remembered it was Jericho. I probably should have, but I don't think I would have remembered it was Jericho. Now, oh, he was here. Jesus was here, walking through these city gates and the walls, and he climbed a tree kind of like this in order to see Jesus, and there were so many people around that he couldn't see him, so he had to climb. It just kind of paints the picture a little bit more. So this is the, now when we get to the actual walls of Jericho. This is what Joshua saw when he crossed Qasr al-Yahud, remember, in that spot. And I'll explain a little bit. You see a lot of brown there? You see a lot of brown? Because I see a lot of brown there. Right? It's hard to get a grasp. I was talking to Michael about this earlier today. It's hard to sometimes get a grasp of the proportions and distance and what's all there when you're just at ground level. And we went to, a couple years ago, some of us went to John Delancey's seminar, and I got a flash drive of some of his drone footage. So I clipped it. I'm going to show his drone footage of Jericho. This is, as it says, this is modern Jericho. So there is a whole city too that maybe we don't think of. That is the Mount of Temptation, that at least is traditionally. I'll show you that again later. Now we're kind of panning across the city, and here is the original Jericho from the Old Testament. Where I was right down in here. I'll show you that later. This is the southern end. You see the double walls? Okay, this is going to be a round cistern I'm going to point out later. He calls it a tower. Again, see the double walls. I think he's going to mention it here, but I was standing right down here when I took that picture. So we'll explain that here a little bit again, in a little bit too. They claim this is the oldest city in the world. See, past that, there's not a lot to see other than a lot of dirt. So it's a little tough to get a grasp of it. This is kind of halfway up the city, and now we're looking down south. So those where I pointed out where I took the picture and where those double walls are, it's going to be all the way at that point, upper right corner, which would be the southern end of the city. So up here, there's some ruins, there's some stones, you don't quite know what you're looking at. This is kind of central as well. The southern end would be to your left, all the way down here. And if you remember, I mentioned the Mount of Temptation. I said I'd point it out later. See this hill here, and that kind of building, or that flat, a little bit flatter top up here? That is where traditionally they consider what they consider to be the spot where Jesus was tempted. Okay, when Satan, remember the Spirit led him to the wilderness, and Satan tempted him? That is traditionally the site. So now, you see where these guys are right here in this walkway, and then you see this divot, okay, this trench. That's for some excavations they've done, especially if, I remember in the 30s, there's a German group, and then in the 50s, I think, a British group. Those are the two main archaeological digs here. And so that, now I'm on that platform, looking down. So they call it a tower or a cistern. Sometimes they think maybe that, because you can see there's access, there's a hatch. You know, it wouldn't have been metal then, but there's a hole, and you can get inside of it. They're not still 100% sure what it was used for, but this is dating back many thousands of years. And they've dug through here, and I don't have a picture of this myself because we couldn't get down in there, but they actually have pictures of areas like this where there is a burn level, and you can see charcoal still kind of in, that's been buried in the walls. This is from down front again. Remember the southern end and the double walls? And hopefully that aerial view kind of helped you see it a little bit too, because I know it's tough, but here's one set, and then there's another set there. So what the Israelites would have seen when they walked up here, this is called, let me see if I can say it right here, revetment, I believe. Is that how you say that word? Basically, these are retaining walls, and these of stone, and there would have been mud brick walls on top of those retaining walls. Okay, so that's the double wall system. So if you can kind of see, I know it's blurry because I had to blow the picture up so much, but people would have seen this. The walls would have been over 25 feet tall total. I mean, this would have been impossible, especially if you've got unfriendly people on the inside. But if you research anything about Jericho, you're going to see a lot of conflicting arguments, because a lot of people, especially there's a Karen, I can't remember what her last name was, but she was the main archaeologist from in the 50s, and she dated these walls differently, and so she has about 300 years difference, and what that does is it causes them to say these walls don't date back to the time of the Israelites. When they got there, there was nothing there. So obviously the Bible is wrong. And so all of that, the digs they can do, they can find everything, but if you look at it a different way, you can find a way to prove your point. And that's what's been done a lot. If it's dated what most scholars now even believe, well, I don't know if most scholars, okay? An incredible number of biblical scholars too, obviously believe this dates back to the time of Joshua and the Israelites. And what they have actually found is, let me see if I have it here too. This is kind of what that mud brick wall would have been like here, just on top of the retaining walls. But what they found is, you can kind of see it rebuilt, how wide it could have been. This lower section right here, it's kind of U-shaped. What they have found is jars full of burnt grain. Why would there be jars full of burnt grain? What did God tell Joshua to do to the city of Jericho? Completely destroy it, right? How long did the siege take? We actually can know this too. 7 days, right? How do we know that? They marched around the city once, how many days? 6 days. On the 7th day, they marched around the city 7 times. And we saw that whole city. Seems a little more feasible now, right? It's not enormous, like it's a good sized city, but it's definitely doable. And the siege only lasted 7 days. What if the siege would have lasted a year? They probably wouldn't have found full jars of grain, right? Or what would they have found if the Jews had ransacked Jericho? Empty, right? What are the Israelites eating at this time? Manna. How happy were they with manna? Don't you think that was hard? As hard as it was for Achan to not grab the gold and the silver and the clothes, I'm sure it would have been just as hard for everyone else to not grab the food. Like here's food. And as good as manna was, and they should have trusted God for it, I kind of get it, right? You get tired of the same thing over and over again because we're just discontented people. But here, they find multiple jars of burnt jars full of grain. That tells you something about the truth of the Bible. They also found, we go back to this, they also found the mud brick walls had fallen out and actually formed a kind of natural siege ramp. We're going to see that when we get to Masada. We'll see the Romans did the same thing with the siege ramp, but God kind of gave the Israelites, as it was built up on this hill, that as everything fell down to the base, they could just walk right into the city and destroy it like God told them to. And you can find, they've found remains of these mud brick walls at the base of these retaining walls. So, not a whole lot to see in a sense, but also at the same time, a whole lot to see. I mean, God's word is true. So, I want to go back here just a couple more minutes to this spot. Remember Qasr al-Yahud? And you see Jericho just to the west of it. So, before we go to, let's see, I want someone to have another reference ready. Let me see. Matthew 3, okay? Someone turn to Matthew 3. All right, well, thank you. All right, so let me ask you this. Going through archaeological records, there is not actually a ton of, if you want to call it, evidence for Israelite presence at a specific turning point, okay? So, why might that be? And I want us to think about that. I'm trying to find a reference here. I'm just going to bank on your memory of God's word, okay? So, in what condition was Canaan when the Israelites took it over? They got there, and what was it like? Full of fruits, big cities, right? Yeah, everything they needed, right? How was Jericho different than most other cities they took? Remember? What were they allowed to do? Person?
They weren't allowed to take the stuff.
Okay, they weren't allowed to take the stuff. Were they in the other cities? Yeah. Okay. Did they destroy the other cities? No. Because remember what God told them? I'm going to give you a land that you don't have to plow. I'm going to give you cities you don't have to build. So what happens when they did take over a city is they just kind of moved right in. They're going to use someone else's pots and pans, right? They're going to move into the palace, and they're going to continue running things, and they're going to continue using the farm implements. They didn't have any farm implements, right? So what would you expect to find? Would you expect to find a hard cutoff and a complete change into a different kind of archaeological finds? You wouldn't. You would expect really a continuous line, right? Because they're going to use the Canaanites' tools, materials, houses, cities, Also, why wouldn't they find more? Did they conquer all of the cities in Canaan? No, they were really bad about that, weren't they? I mean, over and over you hear they conquered some, but they couldn't conquer all of them, and they didn't kick everyone out. And so what you're going to have is almost a cohabitation of this land in a lot of ways. And then when they did take over, you're going to see them using the same thing. So you're not going to see a hard and fast rule. So if you ever read anything about them critiquing, the veracity of the Word of God, because see, there's no evidence. No, there is. It just depends on how you're looking at it. And so I think it's helpful. It was helpful for me to think through that. One said it this way: since the Bible describes a limited, prolonged conquest of Canaan, with Israelites living amidst local population, the distinct archaeological record of their presence would be limited. And they were living among these other people, and that was actually part of their problem, right? If they had actually done what God said, a lot of their problems would have been taken care of too. All right. It wasn't Karen, it was Kathleen Kenyon. It was a K, but I got the wrong K. Kathleen Kenyon, that's who I was looking for. All right, so I want to go back here real quickly to Qasr Yahud, and Matthew chapter 3. Can you read 1 through 6?
In those days came John the Baptist preaching in the wilderness of Judea, and saying, Repent ye, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. For this is he that was spoken of by the prophet Isaiah, saying, The voice of one crying in the wilderness, Prepare ye the way of the Lord, make his path straight. And the same John had his raiment of camel's hair, and a leathern girdle about his loins, and his meat was locusts and wild honey. Then went out to him Jerusalem and all Judea, and all the region round about Jordan, and were baptized of him in Jordan, confessing their sins.
So this is the wilderness of Judea that Matthew mentions, where John was living. He was probably living in some caves in this region. And what was John doing? He was preaching and what? And baptizing. You want to know where he was baptizing? This spot, right? Does that look familiar? Same spot that Joshua and the Israelites crossed. Same spot that Elijah was taken up to be with the Lord. Same spot that Naaman was healed. Now it's the same spot where Jesus Christ is baptized by John the Baptist to begin his ministry. And where Joshua, if you want to say, opened the gates of freedom, the New Testament Joshua, you remember that's what his name is, right? Jesus, Joshua, they're the same name. The New Testament Joshua, Jesus, opened the gates of heaven. And that ministry started right here. They actually would, historically, they would actually, after baptism, they would traditionally serve fried bread. Because what happens when you drop dough into oil? First of all, it does what? Sinks. And then as it cooks, what does it do? Rises again. I think that's a tradition we should return to. Don't you all think we should get fried bread after baptismal service? And then they would drizzle honey over top of it, right? Because it's this new life is sweet. I can get behind that one. I don't know about you guys. I think maybe we need to bring some of that back. What's that?
We're just trying to be biblical.
We're just trying to be biblical. It's so true. Whatever it takes. John lived in his caves nearby. And actually, there's a time, we don't know this for sure, but some believe that Jesus actually went to live with John for a time and lived with him in these caves as you would live with a rabbi. As he was kind of following the track of a Jewish man growing up, and you would serve and you would live with and under a rabbi for a time. I can't prove that, that's just what some say. But what we do know is Jesus was baptized here at this spot. This was the Jordan side looking back at us. And I took a picture and then stopped. But this is where they will have baptisms, and there were a couple of our group that hadn't been baptized yet after they were saved. And so that was really exciting. This is Bob getting baptized, and then this Marcia right here. It was a pretty special thing for you to be able to be baptized there. But can you also see why this is not a normal spot to think, I want to go swimming? So it kind of, again, it makes sense why Naaman wasn't so thrilled. Also, it makes sense that this is a spot that John would serve. Where did he live? In the woods. What was he eating? Locusts and honey. And what was he wearing? You know, camel fur. You know, so it makes sense he's not in a spa. You know, you're not coming to him because it's attractive. There was nothing about John's ministry that was attractive. His message was harsh. It was repent, you're a sinner. And very similar with Jesus, that his ministry would start here, and that something so unassuming, so naturally unpleasant, will be the place where God says, this is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. And you and I can still today follow him. You know, and this is where the ministry started for Jesus. And so that's where I wanted to transition. Next week we'll start looking at New Testament sites. In the Galilee area, we'll see Bethlehem, where Jesus was born. We'll see the shepherd's field, where the shepherds heard from the angels. So we're going to transition now from some Old Testament history, and we're going to start looking at some New Testament history and some sites that I'm looking forward to us seeing together too. Sunday night, yes. Yep, we'll finally be in the New Testament on Sunday night. Okay? So we'll have the youth service next Sunday morning, and then New Testament Israel Sunday night. So I hope you can all make it. Well, any questions about Jericho or Qasr al-Yahud? Jonathan?
I have a really quick question, not related to this or whatever, but
Sure.
my mom and dad want to go. But
Okay.
my he's getting up there in years and working the coal mines all those years. He's having a hard time getting around.
Yep.
Would it be realistic for him to be able to go to a lot of these spots?
Yeah. Most of them, you have a choice, like Bet Shean, where we saw last time, you can walk and they have it pretty accessible, and if you want to walk through the city, walk through the city. If you want to walk up the hill, you can, you don't have to. There was an 85-year-old woman who was there with a walker, so I figure, she can do it, your dad can do it, and if he says, I don't know if I can, then you can rub it in, Dad. There's an 85-year-old lady who did it, come on. So it is a lot of walking. You can't get around that. But I would still say yes. And there were a couple times, actually a couple days, where there were a few people who just couldn't handle it and they stayed at the hotel. They rested up and they got what they could. But most of the time, if you want to, sit in the bus. If you can't do it, or just walk out, see as much as you can, and walk back. So that was very normal. So I would still say, yes, he should go and take you guys with him. You guys can all see it. I should have taken a pedometer though, because I put a lot of miles on those shoes in those few days. Huh?
How far is the Jordan River from the Sea of Galilee?
So this spot of the Jordan is, I'm going to say it would take you an hour to drive up to Galilee. Maybe, let me go way back to the map. Oh, there was one, I'm sorry. There you go. So we're down here, right? Almost at Dead Sea. So, okay, so that's going to be longer than I told you. I'd say that's probably 120, 150 miles, I'm going to guess. If I remember right, all of Israel is like 330 north to south. So I'm kind of guessing. We don't see all of it down south, so maybe it's not quite that far.
Because wasn't it like James and John that were at the Jordan River, and then I don't know.
Well, the Jordan does start north of the Sea of Galilee, flows into the Sea of Galilee, and then it also flows out of the Sea of Galilee
But
down
they
to
were
the
there at
Dead Sea.
Jesus' baptism,
Right.
so they walked all that way to see.
Yeah, but this was, if you remember though, Nazareth is up north, right, by the Sea of Galilee, but Jerusalem and Bethlehem, you know, they were down south, really close here, and Getty, that's right here. You know, Bethlehem, remember David would make that trip. They came from there, so they were from Judea. This wasn't their neighborhood. That's why they stood out every once in a while with their accent, and they would speak Aramaic, and not a lot of them, others did. But yeah, they were there. But that was, I'm not sure if we are dated in any of those where John was preaching, but if you remember too, this was a fairly normal trip for them because they had to go down to Jerusalem 3 times a year for the religious festivals. And they would actually walk this path, and they would come across, do you remember the Amaris, right? So it comes up through, they would either take that, you can walk across here to the Jordan side, you would actually cross the Jordan side and it's a little flatter, and you could go across there and go up the Jordan River. A couple ways you can do it, but they would have to come down to Jerusalem at least 3 times a year. So I'm wondering if maybe it was on one of those times. You know, Jesus seemed to have his ministry peaks, if you want to say, around and connected to the festivals. So it would be maybe more normal when those things happen. For instance, we're going to see later where the feeding of the 5,000, there were probably 20 to 25,000 people there. Well, there's not anywhere close to that number of people in that whole area, but there were that many because of the road, because of the festivals, and so there were a lot of people traveling, and so a lot of times that's overlapping. So I don't know, but I'm just guessing it would maybe overlap with some of those. I don't know if that answered anything, but sorry. Anyone else? Okay. All right, well, you are dismissed. Now you know Qasr al Yahud, and it's a much more important site than I would have thought, right? For all the places to have 4 major events in Scripture happen at that unassuming place is pretty neat. All right, good night. I will see you later.